Hello, I hope you are all well. Today I will be doing the end of the year book tag, and I was tagged to do this by the lovely Vix from 1 Minute Reads. The questions in this tag are all about the books that I am planning to read before the end of the year, so it's kind of a TBR tag. First question is, are there any books you started this year you need to finish? Generally, I'm someone who reads one book at a time and will either finish that book or DNF it. I don't tend to have unfinished books waiting for long periods of time. However, the one exception for that this year has been the Roman Mystery series, which I've talked about before on this channel. They're a childhood favourite that I'm rereading the whole series of so that I can finally get to the final books in the series that I have never actually read. And I haven't been putting these on my Goodreads because I wanted my Goodreads reading challenge to be separate. Because these books are kids' books, they're really easy to read and they're also really short. So I wanted the 52 books that I challenged myself to read this year to be, for the most part, new reads. To answer the question, I would like to finish these 3 books before the end of the year, just because I keep all the books from my childhood at my parents' home still because I have no space for them up here. So each time I go down to my parents' house, I take back some of these books and bring up a new 2 or 3 to read. So I'd like to finish these ones before Christmas, so when I go down to my parents' house for Christmas, I can just take these back and bring back the next 3 in the series. So question 2 is very Northern Hemisphere orientated. Do you have an autumnal book to transition to the end of the year? And Vix, when tagging me, was really interested by the fact that living in Australia, we have reverse seasons here, and she wanted to know if there were any spring books that I had in mind to transition myself into spring. However, October has become my Halloween reading month, so all the books I'm reading are very autumnal or wintry at the moment. I tend not to really read seasonal anyway. I find what's going on in the outside world doesn't really affect the way that I view the book that I'm reading. In fact, I probably am more likely to reverse the seasons of the books I'm reading. For example, I remember choosing to reread My Family and Other Animals, which is an incredibly summery book in the absolute depths of winter when I was living in the Blue Mountains, which is an especially cold part of Australia, and I enjoyed it all the more because I was so cold and the book I was reading was so warm and summery, and it made me feel a lot better. And reversely, in summer it can be so hot and so claustrophobic because you become quite confined to indoors because it is just too hot to be outside. I'd rather not read about hot weather in a book. I think in Australia we're quite used to our media being the reverse of the season that we're experiencing, especially around Christmas time when all the films on TV are Christmas films and they're all set in winter and there's a lot of snow, and all our decorations are still very snow orientated, and yet it can get up to 40 degrees in December. So to answer the question, I do have an October TBR that I am reading through this month, which is getting me in a very Halloween mood, if not autumnal mood, seeing as it isn't autumn. As a side note, it's also been really humid so far this month. We've had a lot of rain and quite a few gloomy days, so in a way it's kind of appropriate, even if the actual temperature is getting slightly warmer. So for Halloween, I am reading The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which is a massive book, and so I'm sort of slowly getting through this one in between the other books from the library that I have to read a lot faster as I own this one. I've also started reading The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which so far I'm really enjoying. I also got Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. I had no idea that the author of Fahrenheit 451 was really into Halloween as well. He has another book, I think it's called The Halloween Tree, which was also in the library, and I was going to read that one because it sounded more directly Halloween. But then my library has this habit of just getting rid of books randomly, and so it disappeared from my library catalogue, which was super annoying. This one is set in a small town in Illinois the week before Halloween. It's about 2 boys on the brink of manhood and a very spooky carnival, according to the blurb, so hopefully this will be interesting. I also have Stephen King's The Shining requested from the library. I've never seen the film, and so I was kind of curious to read the book first before I eventually see the film, though I'm not a big fan of horror films, but I don't really mind those old school ones as much. I watched Carrie the other day and I actually really enjoyed it because it's not really a horror film until the end, and I already knew what was coming anyway. And then if I have time, I might read this. I actually got this for Christmas last year, and it's a collection of spooky short stories that were commissioned by Charles Dickens for his periodical newspaper all the year round, and apparently also features stories by Elizabeth Gaskell and Wilkie Collins, so that might be interesting. I don't know, I'm just not a fan of short stories, and even though I love all these authors, there's something in me that only wants to spend time on the absolute classics and not go into stuff that might not be actually that good but may have just been published because the famous names can be used to sell the book. Anyway, we'll see, maybe they are actually good, who knows. Question number 3, is there a new release you're still waiting for? The short answer is no. I don't really have any favourite authors that aren't dead. Margaret Atwood's the only one, so if she was releasing a new book I would be super excited for that. Otherwise there's no one author whose works I will automatically read. Question 4, what are 3 books you want to read before the end of the year? I picked 3 that whenever I go through my TBR list in my library account, those books always stand out to me as ones that I really want to pick up soon. So the first one is The Penelopead, I think I'm saying that right, by Margaret Atwood. It's kind of the last one of her novels that my library owns that I have left to read, and I did want to read at least one of her novels each year until I've run out and then I have to start again, so I'd like to get to that one. There's also Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. I was actually looking through my classics book tag the other day, and in that tag it asks you to list 4 classics that you'd like to get to, and I'd read all of the ones that I picked for that question aside from this book. Jane Eyre is one of my favourite books, however I did not enjoy Villette at all. I don't think I even finished it, so I'll see how I get along with Shirley. And the other book is an Australian new release called Suburbia by Jeremy Chambers. So I heard of this book through an Australian author, Peggy Frew. She was on one of the book programs on Radio National and was talking about what she was currently reading, and this was one of the books that she was really interested in. She wrote one of my favourite books from a couple of years ago called Hope Farm, which was marketed as an adult book but it read to me kind of like a young adult book, and she's obviously really interested in sort of stories about young people and adolescence, as this book is also about young people living in suburbia in Australia, and it sounded right up my alley, so I will pick it up. But if you don't hear me talk about it ever again, that means that I have tried it and did not like it and just sent it back to the library. Question 5 is there a book you think could become your favourite? So there is a book I want to read, not necessarily this year but sometime, called Claudini by Colette. There's a new film coming out starring Keira Knightley as the author Colette, and it tells the story of how her husband was a famed writer of his time in France, but he actually used a lot of ghostwriters to write his books, including his wife who wrote the Claudini series. The premise of the film sounded so interesting that I was really curious to read the actual novels that she wrote. Annoyingly, they're not in my library, and the only copy of the book I could find new was a compiled version of all 4 novels in one book, which I just couldn't bring myself to buy because I really hate compilation novels. I just like my novels to be individual and separate. I've been looking at secondhand bookshops and have not found a copy, so I may resort to eBay. Also, I really didn't like the cover of that compilation book, and I really like the cover of the individual book that is on Goodreads. So I was thinking this might be my favourite because it sounds like something I would like, about a girl at the turn of the century in a boarding school. I used to love boarding school set stories when I was a child, especially those sort of inner Blyton ones, and I imagine that this is perhaps a more adult and a more realistic version of those stories. Question 6, have you already made reading plans for 2019? In a way, my plan is not to make any plans. So this year I did have a few TBR months where I purposely read books that I planned to read months in advance because they were nominated and won prizes, and then also I have my October TBR that I always read. And as much as I enjoyed reading some of those prize-winning books, I did feel they kind of got in the way when I, in the middle of those reading months, came across a book that I really wanted to read and realised that I couldn't read it until the next month. So my main plan really is to read exactly what I want to read whenever I want to read it. I also want to stop reading books that I'm not enjoying. I definitely was better than last year in DNFing books, but I think I still read too many mediocre books this year. I definitely want to read more of the books on my Goodreads that I've listed as want to read, and also books that I own that I haven't read. Almost the whole bottom shelf of this bookshelf behind me is filled with books that I haven't actually read yet that I impulse bought from op shops, and it is absolutely terrible to keep getting new books from the library when I have all these potentially great books to read right here. So from the 1st of January, that is what I'm going to do. That is the end of the tag. Thank you so much, Vix, for tagging me. I will tag a few people off the top of my head, so Tash Talks Tons, Amy from Polyreader, and Pip Reads. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye!